Hello. It's always difficult to follow introductions like that. I think, firstly, I want to just acknowledge what a privilege it is that we are starting to have these sort of conversations. It's been a while since we've started to look at the seriousness of the world and started to have a look at the seriousness of the need of how we look at the future in pretty radical ways. So firstly, I want to start by acknowledging that. I want to dive straight in. When we talk about the world and design the world, how many people here are vegan? 1, 2, 3. Have a look at this graph. When people talk about the Anthropocene, this is what they mean. That is all the wild animals in the world. Zebras, lions, koalas, deer, whatever you like. That's him. The world is a farm on which there's a small place for wild animals called a zoo. So when we talk about the Anthropocene, when we talk about designing the planet, we already are. You're passively all involved in designing the planet, quite fundamentally, to the point, actually, where the planet's entirely human function, I would argue. In that context, it's also worth recognizing the scale. What I'm going to talk about is firstly the scale of the issues that we're facing over the next 10 years. Everyone talks about circularity. It's the kind of new en vogue conversation. Denmark is the most circular economy in the overdeveloped economies. I'm using the term overdeveloped economies. 4% of its material economy is circular. 4%. Global average is 7.2%, which means the overdeveloped economies are effectively pretty negative in terms of actually dealing with waste. So when we start to talk about the future, how do you go from 4% to 90%? That's the design challenge. In 2019 to 2020, the global increase in energy demand was greater than all the installed renewables. Increase in energy demand was greater than all the installed renewables. This is when coal built our civilization. We are a function of massive release of hydrocarbon energy. Our civilization, as you have it, is a function of it. We have to get rid of nearly 80% of our energy source, if not more, and replace it. That is fundamentally a different type of civilization. We are talking about something of the order of reimagining what we've built in the Industrial Revolution and reimagining the world forward. And we have to do it perhaps in 20 years, if not slightly less. So, we're nowhere close. In order to do that, that's our today's material demand, that circle over there. We are going to increase our material demand by 600% in order to do that. 80% of our biodiversity destruction is done by our material economies and our mining economies. In this future that we're living in, people casually now talk about 3 degrees. 3 degrees warmer. We, I think, have now already hit 2 degrees on average for the last year. But that's because of El Niño and other effects. 3 degrees warmer. 3 degrees warmer means 5 degrees warmer on land. It means 8 degrees warmer in cities. 8 degrees warmer in cities. 3, 5, 8. By the way, 3 is not comfortable. Let me just tell you that. At 1.7 to 1.9 degrees, we lose one of the major food baskets in the world. You're already starting to see food becoming a systemic issue, and you will. Food prices have gone up by between 50 to 60% in the UK. We're going to see food become more and more fragile around the world. And if you listen to Professor Jim Blundell, he'll tell you a fantastic kind of analysis of the food systems. 8 degrees. This is what happens between 2 and 2.5 degrees. Vast amounts of territories become outside human habitable zones, niche zones. So when people talk about 1.5 billion people being on the move, what they're talking about is that. So, if we're going to talk about design futures, We are designing into these futures. I think we should be careful about the language we use here. Are we talking about climate change or climate breakdown? Climate is the idea of predictable weather. The loss of predictability means the loss of effectively insurability, means loss of capital markets. Sounds nice. What does it actually mean? Well, it means places like Florida, places like Nova Scotia, places like Australia, the cost of insuring your house is the same cost as rebuilding it. What does that mean? That means you can't get a mortgage. What does that mean? That most of those houses are only being bought by people who can afford cash purchases. Just to give you an idea, 70% of purchases in New York were entirely cash purchases. So, massive inequality in where we buy and how we buy. Second, securitization of everything. The big conversation of the next few years will be the theory of security. How do we secure the future? Everything, food, energy, water systems, mineral systems, all the way up, will be all focused on the theory of security. It won't be a simple security of a red line boundary around the UK. It'll be about a system level security. What's the role of design when you look at fragile food systems? What's the role of design when you look at effectively fundamentally different rare earth minerals, rare earth management in different formats? This is all going to change the world around us. My number one message here is the world as we know it is not a linear projection of the now. It is a fundamentally different world. And none of this transition is possible without any form of justice. This is one of our biggest issues. People talk about the ecological issues. What will kill us first is the sociological. We will hit social tipping points before we hit ecological tipping points. So, my number one message, if you're looking at design research, look into these contexts. Follow the numbers. Follow the scale of the transition we're facing and how is your research relevant in that context. Some examples. This transition is going to invite us to change every layer of our economy. All the way from our material economy, we'll have to dematerialize our material consumption, we'll have to make it more durable, we'll have to make it circular. We'll have to shift all the way, our human development economy is in the midst of one of the largest transformations. What is the role of the human and the machine synthesis? It is not a theory of humans as units of labor. We're going to have to unleash a new form of embodied intelligence capabilities that are vital for the next economy. The big conversations we're in the middle of is how do you design, how do you invest in the collective intelligence of a city? Not the individual function of a school, but the collective intelligence of a city. How do you think about that? How do you understand those assets? All the way down to food systems. The number one big crisis that's going to come at us is our food systems and thereby our land use reforms. Every one of those layers is going to be transformed. And obviously by the biointegrity, rebuilding the biointegrity of our landscapes. What does it mean? Designing into 3-degree futures. It isn't glorified new buildings. The UK, how many homes do you think the UK can afford to build if it lives against the Paris Accord? Numbers. All of the UK per year, how many homes can it build if it agrees to the Paris Accord to which it's signed up to? 14,000 homes a year. All of Europe, 144,000 homes. That is the total limit. Now, you talk to politicians, they'll say, no, but we have to build 350,000 homes. Where from? So, as constraints start to actually change the landscape of operation, how do we build social justice into our material economies? We do not have the labor force, we don't have the material economies to deliver this. That means change will look fundamentally different. It's not about big glorified new buildings, it's about how we adapt our environments in really simple but radical ways. This is a piece of work we've been doing with Civic Square, which will be public in a little bit. Designing for constraint-driven futures. The average house in the UK, 800 kilograms per CO2 per meter squared. The best is 150 kilograms. We have to be down to 6.3 kilograms. So anyone that tells you I can build a low carbon house in terms of embodied energy, they're nowhere close to the numbers. Even if you get to hempcrete, rammed earth, you get to 7 kilograms. UK is facing a no-build future. So in a no-build future, what is the role of architecture? How do you build social justice? How do you reutilize your material economy? We're going to have to think radically different. Designing in entanglements. I'm going to go through this relatively fast. Just keep an eye on the time, sorry. Increasingly, our theory of value is problematic. We have to think about design. This is a piece of work we did around an underperforming private house, a badly designed private house. Where were the costs? It wasn't in the landlord or the asset. It was all into actually adjacent agents, public goods and other services. So what is the idea of a private house when it creates huge costs for society? When we start to look at the world through entangled lens, we start to see a different world. If you take a tree generates vast amounts of benefits and yet actually those benefits are not crystallized. So we all draw nice trees on streets, but Sheffield City Council, for example, would cut them down after 10 years. Why? Because the accounting standard meant that it's cheap, the maintenance costs and the insurance costs would be too high after 10 years. So you would chop it down and replace it with a new tree. But the tree's benefits only occur 40 years down the line. So when you start to look at the cooling effect, if you get the male and female trees right, the reduction of asthma, if you look at the flooding risk management, all these benefits, these entangled benefits, redesign the world around us. All the way from stuff like even the role of common goods. This is a piece of work we did on the High Line in New York, which looked at the High Line in New York cost $187 million to build, total generated $3.48 billion of land value uplift. All of that land value uplift was privatized. So common infrastructures create vast spillovers value. How do we start to think about design in the age of entanglements? How do we optimize for multiple benefits? How do we start to think about that fundamentally in the role of design, which is going to become fundamentally critical? Designing for a new material economy. How do we design for a new material economy? I love this quote. I borrowed the stones and I'll return them back after I've used it. If we look at the 21st century material economy, we're going to have to think about circularity in a much more deeper, profound way. How do you build the institutions around that? Again, some work we're doing around new forms of trust structures to be able to design and hold. So this is electric batteries, and how do you hold them in trust in different formats to drive circularity and other formats? How do we think about a new economy of things and beyond things? How do we move from a worldview of dominion and control, which has been the way we've organized the world, to a different way of organizing it? Because it's very clear a dominion theory of organizing can't deal with complexity. It's been generating externalities which are self-terminating us. And you're seeing some beautiful work going on in places like New Zealand and Australia where, whether it's mountains becoming self-sovereign or rivers becoming self-sovereign, even work in Sheffield right now. So what happens if things become their own legal entities and self-sovereign in different formats? And this also requires us to design and rethink the dark matter. We often think about the world through the implied order, the physical bricks, buildings that we see around us. But actually, this revolution is fundamentally a revolution of how we imagine the world. It's a revolution of our theory of property, the idea of organizing the world through property, the idea of labor, human as units of labor. It's recoding all those things that are no longer fit for purpose, because we're no longer single, isolated individuals. It's a revolution of imagining who you are as individuals. Are you individuals? Are you multitudes? Are you multitudes of organisms? Are you beings, objects, or are you becomings? It's a revolution of what we imagine ourselves to be. And I suppose my final point, and hopefully I'm close enough to time, yeah, that's wicked, is that I think this is one of the most extraordinary moments to live. An extraordinary moment where I think we're going to be pretty much redesigning everything around us from the deep code level upwards. But this world will not look like new skyscrapers being built. Certainly for a short period while we have to rebuild our energy systems at almost root level. This won't be a quaint world of CABE and nice design reviews. That world is dead and buried, and rightly so. If you follow the constraints, we're into a fundamentally different world. And our landscape of how we deliver justice, how we deliver the comforts and the environments that we're going to require is going to be fundamentally reimagined. We're going to reimagine our material economy, We're going to reimagine the durability of that economy. We're going to have to reimagine how we share use of buildings and our environments in radical new ways without creating rent-seeking systems. We're going to have to reimagine ourselves in this process. It's an incredible time to be a designer. This is as close as you get to going back to the Industrial Revolution and imagining what the world could be like. We're going to have to rebuild it from root to scratch at the conceptual level all the way through. Don't just think it, don't just do it, you have to think and do it. You're going to have to imagine deeply into the future. And it's happening to us already. And I think design and design research is going to have to play a critical role in that transition. And that's why I really welcome the fact that we are all here and in London finally starting to have the type of conversations that are really necessary to look at the scale of change that's going to come at us. The only choice will be whether we'll be victims of the change or whether we'll be partners, dancers into this future together. That is the choice that we'll face, certainly at the UK level, many other places. With that, I thank you.